But it's a story about two women that discover each other, love each other, and then fight and part ways and are bitter enemies. And that's when my story starts. And now they're forced to work together, and they discover that they love each other too much to be apart. As friends, it's not romantic. Interestingly, the internet constantly asks me, but could they please be a couple? And I always say, guys, I wrote 6 episodes. Episode 7 belongs to the world. You can do whatever you want with that. From the moment that I knew this was going to be 2 women, and in my original idea, it was a white woman and a Latina. And I thought, who's going to be this white woman? When you start writing, it's fantastic to have a face in mind, right? And in rewatching True Detective, I felt that it had endless connections to Seven, the movie, the David Fincher movie. And there's no Seven without The Silence of the Lambs. So it felt amazing, the idea of bringing the face of the start of this entire school of dark serial killers back to its final inheritor. So yes, I wrote it for Jodie. In the case of Navarro, I wanted a Latina because, it's who I am, and I'm very happy to represent who I am. But the more I learned about the communities in Northwest Alaska, the more I understood that it would be unfair to not make part of that pair of characters someone that comes from that community, someone that her origin is connected to that community. It's just silly to put 2 detectives that come from the outside and figure out what's happening in this place. So I changed that character into someone who is of Alaskan descent, of Native Alaskan descent. And I knew that it was going to be complicated to explain this to HBO because the formula of True Detective is film stars that are now making TV. I talked to my casting director and she said, I know exactly who you want. And Reis had released recently a movie that I hadn't seen called Catch the Fair One. Reis was at that moment the world champion of her weight in boxing. And I was like, a boxer that can act. And I saw the movie and no doubt she could do it. So I went to HBO and took a breath and said, guys, here's what's gonna happen. We're going to create an opportunity for a Native American star to be the lead of True Detective. And they were like, but the moment they saw her photograph and even the trailer of the movie, they listened. And then they watched the movie and then she taped for us and it was a no-brainer. Jodie loved the idea and you can see the chemistry between the 2 of them.
We can work together and figure out any.
No. I'm not working with you again, ever.
You think I want to work with you?
I do, actually. Yeah.
So many references inform the aesthetics, the themes, and there's even winks to my film and TV obsessions. The Salal station, we designed it to feel a little bit like Nostromo before the astronauts wake up. But it also feels a little bit like the Overlook Hotel, an empty hotel watching you. And the way we operated the camera there is taken from that movie. The thing is everywhere, from shots that are exactly from the thing to putting the movie in one of the bookshelves. And the twisted bodies frozen is also aesthetic references to the twisted monsters in the thing. There is tiny details like, this is just a wink to a absolute personal obsession. There is a doodle in After Hours, Scorsese's After Hours, when the main character is washing his face, he's lost in Soho, looks up, and then next to the mirror, there's a doodle of a shark eating a man's penis. And I used that doodle in a jail where one of my characters is detained. I couldn't do it exactly the same for rights reasons, but it is recognizable, There's, I think, a lot of love to not only the thing from Carpenter to Prince of Darkness. Seven is a massive influence, and there is little winks all over the place to The Silence of the Lambs, lines that are directly lifted from the Silence of the Lambs. When you watch something that affects you deeply, and it has happened throughout my career, that I don't recognize sometimes that I'm using something that I drank up from some other storyteller. And when I made Tigers, the girl, the main character, and it's obviously such a massive influence, Pan's Labyrinth. And Guillermo has been such a champion of that movie. But when I wrote it, the main character carries a piece of chalk and draws lines that become magical limits. And that exact thing happens in Pan's Labyrinth. But I didn't recognize it until Guillermo told me. And obviously I took the idea from there. It's just sometimes you're stealing and you don't even know it.
Step out slowly. It's the APF investigation.
You know, people say this in interviews, but I think many times it's bullshit. This is not bullshit. Making this series was an absolute daily pleasure. Obviously, the conditions in the ice, in the tundra, were not exactly balmy or pleasant, but the challenge became part of the spirit, and we became something of explorers in the Arctic ourselves. And just the cast loved those characters and loved the story and loved each other. So it was so much fun to go and make them. Sometimes the most complicated ones to land are the most pleasurable ones. So one of my favorites is the aftermath of Hank Pryor's death. We had talked about that scene so many times, discussed it so many times in rehearsals. I rewrote, the actors would work with it in front of me. I would work with them guiding, and then I would take their lines and rewrite and come back, and they would say, it's great. And then the next time we read it, it's like, it could be better. Let's go again. And then we have it, it's done. And the day that we get there, Jodie Foster gets to set and says, I don't think the beginning is going to work. And I go like, what do you mean? And she goes like, it makes no sense that, and she was right. Incredible after so many rehearsals, but it's instead of panicking, what you do is like, this is an opportunity because we're here and we have the emotion and we just killed Hank this morning. Let's understand, we're carrying it. And we redrew the scene there and we rewrote the lines there. And instead of being a horrible panic of what the hell, I don't know what we're going to shoot, it becomes this alive, beautiful monster where everyone is going like, ah, I know, wait, no, oh, someone says something and they go like, oh, and then I do this. And it's just beautiful, it's music, and it becomes jazz. So that was glorious to make. And another one, very different, was the one where Jodie lays down the pieces of paper that she's printing about the Salal men. And she does this thing, she creates a grid, a perfectly orderly grid, and then she makes chaos between them to try to find the connections in a more instinctual, organic way. And in doing so, she ends up creating a spiral on the floor. And it seems like a simple scene. We were there for an entire day. It's so important. It's the moment that we see that there is something more to this case. And we see that she who has been resisting it is going to go down the rabbit hole. And it was so beautiful to just play with the paper and understand what we do. And it was just a joy. You know, she turned around and said, how does it feel to write the scene and seeing it happen exactly the way you dreamed about it? And it feels pretty good.
You're not gonna blame her on me. And I wasn't even here. You know who was here? You. You were here. It was your case all those months. You didn't close it. You.
Exactly.
The way I went about this, because I had never written a murder mystery before. I love them. I consume them like crazy. I grew up on a steady diet of them, but I had never done it. It was the pandemic when I started writing it, and I sat down in front of my desk going like, what is the case? what is the damn case? And nobody gives you a guide on how to write a murder mystery. And if they do, it's going to be a bad one because it's going to be predictable, right? So I took a deep breath, closed my eyes, and tried to remember, what about a mystery fascinates me? And what happened when I was a small girl that I could not stop obsessing about them? And I think it's the same thing that gets people obsessed in this podcast and this community of true crime. And it is the unsolved mysteries. It doesn't have to be an unsolved crime. That's a whole thing, and they're fascinating ones. But unsolved mysteries, things that we don't know what happened there. And even when we come with final explanations, they still don't explain everything. So I went through the endless files of the internet into a beautiful rabbit hole. And so many of them, I was like, oh, this one. Oh, I remember this one. And the Dyatlov Pass incident jumped at me because it happened in the ice. It happened not that long ago in the 50s. And it felt similar to what could happen to the scientists. And it's just so full of weird details that the latest explanations don't explain. I'm sorry. So I was like, let's Dyatlov Pass this. And there is people that are going to go, that's the Dyatlov Pass, and it's happening. And I love it because I see you, we know each other, we want to know. And I created this story to fantasize about possibilities. And the Marie Celeste is a thing that I read when I was a really young child. And it's a story of a ship that took off in New York in the 19th century and was found drifting a couple of weeks later. And the entire crew had vanished into thin air, leaving behind, a bowl of soup with a spoon there, their sleepers next to the bed. They just vanished. There was no traces of violence, nothing, an abandoned ship. And those two together became Salal. And, Roanoke and, all the places where people just vanish into thin air. It's kind of an obsession. What could have possibly happened? Are they out there? Did they die? What happened? So that's and then I was just writing. Once you find that, you just go.
This tattoo was on Annie's body. So what? It's the same case.
No one stops to draw on their own forehead while they're freezing to death. So maybe the killer was out there on the ice with them.
I come from cinema. So I constructed it as I would in a movie. So the clues are there. And if you're sitting in a cinema or even in your home watching a movie linearly once, you do need to put the little seeds that when you make the magician's reveal, ideally your audience is going to go, oh, it was right there and I didn't see it. But what I didn't understand, and it's kind of a beautiful problem to have, is that people were going to watch this series and watch the same episode 4, 5, 6 times, and then talk to their friends and go on the internet, and someone would catch a little detail in one episode and someone else would catch something else in one little episode, and there's a network of coach detectives solving the case. The next time I do this, I'm going to have to, I think it's hard because I think I'm going to have to bury them deeper, and that might kill the fun of the discovery. But it's a very specific phenomenon.
No, we did exactly what we needed to do.
No, we're not doing that. All right? We're just doing this one thing. We're gonna crack it, close your case, I close my case, and then that's it for the two of us.
Sometimes the closest thing to an image is its negative image. If you're not going to do exactly the image, which I would never try to imitate that first season, what's the point? But how can you capture what it is? By doing something different. And it is by doing an opposite. And the moment that it was Alaska versus the heat of the bayou, it became an idea after the other of how everything could be turned around and be in a way the same. So where you have an extraordinary male universe and male obsessions and male fantasies and fears, you make that female. Where you have the yellows at the burn oranges of the original True Detective, here you have the blues and the blacks of the Arctic night. And it became that mirror image but in a black, dark mirror. Because what I set out to do is to say, whenever it came organically, never forced on the story, but when it came organically, that it happens in the same universe. And Issa Alaska 2023 is exactly the future of Louisiana 2007. And the murders that happen in Louisiana are real in the world of Ennis. So those connections were very, very natural. If I'm going to talk about Alaska, in revising that first season, turns out that the father of the main character had lived and died in Alaska. So it would be weird to talk about Alaska and be making True Detective and not reference that. And then I needed a symbol that would warn my characters of the proximity of places where horrible things happen, right? And season 1 had one. So it would be very weird to have a different symbol in season 4 if we already established in this mythology a symbol that signifies the proximity to that other level of existence. Carcosa is called in the first season. In my series, it is the Night Country. But the concepts are similar. And so those little connections came very organically. And it was not a mission to put them there. It was just saying, this is the same world. One thing I knew from the very beginning is that the theme song had to be impactful and had to be perfect for the series, because that first season of True Detective had the perfect song, and the lyrics didn't really connect, but the feeling of the song connected beautifully. And it had, the images were so powerful. We haven't seen those dissolves between characters and places. And I wanted to create a title sequence that was just as impactful, but completely its own twist, not trying to imitate it. Because for that, you continue doing the same. Why bring me? So I talked to a lot of title makers, and me and Peter Anderson, the man that designed the titles, we got super drunk a couple of nights and just throwing ideas at each other, and then coming back to the table and going, this is not going to work, and then doing it again, and then finally it's a road, there's things under the ice, all the little elements that will play through the series are going to be there. Fantastic. What's a song? So I listened to so much music that I had, and I've listened over the years. So you listen to different songs, songs that you had, songs that you love, songs that you never listened to. You go down rabbit holes of this song by this singer, but this composer, but this lyricist, and I was not finding the song that I wanted. And then I just simply remembered that when I was writing the series, I was listening constantly to that record of Billie Eilish. And when I listen again to that song, it's funny because it was not the direction I expected that track to go. But every single line of the lyrics seems connected to the plot. I wonder if, by listening to it, I wrote a couple of things without knowing. And the attitude and the badassery of the song just connected beautifully with the series. And knowing that it's a very different spirit from the songs used in the past, but knowing that this is a different incarnation, I went for it. So that was that song. And then the other songs in the show, you just edit, and when a moment asks for a song. And that is one of my passions, spending 3 days looking for the perfect song for that. And then you end up with 10 or 12, and you go to your editors and your music editor, and you go, okay, cut them. Use this line, cut them here, and then sometimes they don't work and you have to go again. And sometimes you end up with 4 songs that are incredible, and picking the one, it takes you a couple of weeks of rewatching the scene. It's so much fun to do that.